Welcome to the Future Stylescapes course. Thank you very much for enrolling and being a part of this class. Sit back, relax, learn a few new things, and I hope that by the end of this, you'll be able to successfully do stylescapes in the way that you've never done them before. Here's the agenda for today. We're gonna do a quick intro and overview. I'm gonna talk to you about your desired future state, but the parts that you need to focus on most are points 3 through 8. This is really the how-to part in terms of doing the stylescapes. In part 9, I'm gonna go over examples. I'm gonna give you an exercise to do, basically homework, if you will, so that you can get some practice building a stylescape. I highly recommend that you do that so you can become familiar with how to do it and have the confidence to talk about it. My name is Chris Doe, and I'll be your teacher for this class. What are stylescapes? Well, stylescapes are the bridge between design thinking and visual design. It lives in between these two worlds, and you don't have to be a designer to make them. So if you are a user experience designer and you feel like you've been left out of the design game, stylescapes are a great bridge for you to do so that the designers have a direction from you and you get to shape the visual language of what's to come. On the other side, if you're a designer and you don't do UX design, this is a great way to try out ideas and to build that bridge so that the person who's doing UX also has a great sense of where you're going visually so that they can also be involved in the project. I need to remind you that stylescapes are an internal communication tool, and there's an asterisk there for a reason. I'll get to that in 1 second. It's used to gather feedback from your client to get rapid and high fidelity prototypes done very quickly with low commitment from you. There may be some issues or questions that you're gonna have about copyright. That's the asterisk, okay? This is an internal communication tool. It's not meant to be shown on your website or a marketing tool because you're using the images that you're pulling from disparate sources that you don't own. Another thing to note is do not use any of the elements that you gather from other creative firms in the actual production of the finished pieces that you do. They're meant for inspiration. It's meant to have a conversation with the client as to what might or might not work. From there, you'll use that as a guide to design the thing that you need to make. So here's the problem. Every time you go from something familiar, what you're used to, and you have to move to something new, there's a lot of anxiety. And if you're working with a client, they're not sure what's going on. The process itself is rather opaque, and there's a lot of guessing. Will I like the work at the end? Did the designer really listen to what it is that I have to say? Will this work for my customer base? What's happening there is that when you go for the reveal and you don't take intermediate steps to get there, there leaves a lot of questions. And the results can be one of two outcomes. One, the clients could love it, giving you that big thumbs up saying you're a genius. And on the other hand, and this has happened to us and probably to you, and probably one of the reasons why you're tuning into this course is that for whatever reason, you put your heart and soul into the work and you love it and you think it's great. But when you go to present it, the clients can say, we're underwhelmed, or this wasn't what we're hoping for, or I like this, but it's not gonna work for us. And so we're living and dying on that thumbs up or thumbs down reaction. There is a better way. And I want to remind you of this idea from my friend Blair Enns, who wrote the Win Without Pitching Manifesto. He says, stars do not audition, and you are the star. You are the superstar, and you don't try out. So we must give up our addiction to the presentation and the big reveal. So is there a better way? Of course there is. How do we move from the familiar to the new and reduce friction? The way we do that is through perpetual, continuous alignment. So there's a graduated step from moving from blue to yellow. And we refer to this in some of the videos that you may have seen from us called scaffolding. You're taking steps together versus one giant leap. So the old way, what does the old way look like? Well, you may be familiar with this process. A client comes to you in a panic. They give you a brief and they're telling you everything that they want and need this thing to be. It happens to be what we will refer to as a brain dump. And you're sitting there trying to sort out all this information in your mind. What's important for me to listen to? What can I ignore? And it's a lot for you to process. You do your best and you go away and you enter into that creative black box where only you know what you're going to make. And then with all that work and energy, you produce a high fidelity design, hoping for that reaction. Now, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't work, you wind up in this infinite loop of revisions. You show something that looks final, you're passionate about it, you believe in the results, but the clients make another adjustment. And over time, this erodes confidence in the client, to which point sometimes they go away and they do their own research and they become a pretend art director and they say, you know, Jimmy or Mary or Bobby, maybe it needs to be more like this. And this is the place you want to avoid at all costs. And the result of this has an impact both on your happiness and your profitability. So there's a little arc I created here. So at the beginning, you're in that honeymoon phase where both of you think it's going to be amazing and great. And then it takes a little bit of work, but you think, you know, I got this. And then at some point, because now you're not being paid enough to do all these revisions, resentment starts to set in. And then you wind up in the dark night of the soul. Where did it go wrong? Well, I want to take you back to another very influential author, Simon Sinek, in his book, Start With Why. He says that we have this gut feeling which begins in the limbic brain, and we don't have words to express ourselves. And as it travels outwards towards the neocortex, where the language and all our memories are stored, a lot gets lost in translation. And that's why what we have to do is help our clients translate feelings into words, words into images to get alignment. That's what we're trying to do. Well, Socrates said the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but building on the new. So is there a new preferred way? Of course there is. I'm not going to tease you like that. So here we are in that same diagram that I showed you shortly before. The client has a need, a want. You go into that creative black box. This is where you need to insert an interim process to gain alignment with your clients. This is what we refer to as stylescapes. So this is critical because when we hear words, we all have different ways of coding the language so that beautiful, organic, elegant might mean one thing to a client and it means something totally different to you. So what we want to do is quickly test if we're on the same page. We take those words and we translate them to images so that we can quickly refer back and say, did we hear you correctly? Is this what it looks like? This is a low commitment, high fidelity, but really fast, fun, and easy thing to do. What we're changing is the creative black box now has direction. It moves up in the timeline so you can have greater confidence in building beautiful websites, logos, identity systems, branding, whatever it is that you build products. You now have great confidence knowing that I have clarity on where this is going to wind up. So you can spend all that time refining and making things look beautiful, knowing that your clients are going to approve it. The result is quite different now. The result looks something like this. Now, this is an exaggerated graph, but remember before, this is honeymoon phase. There's a little bit of work, but instead of feeling lost, we feel like we're learning new things, which is really important to our creative development. This is fun even. And what can happen if you do this correctly is that project scope increases in a way that the budgets get bigger and what they ask you to do, what the clients ask you to do, becomes much, much more interesting. And once you learn how to present and work this way, I don't think you'll ever want to go back. Okay, so let's do a little thought experiment, a little mental exercise. So walk with me and see what happens here, okay? I want to talk to you about your desired future state. And it's something I call mind walking. Physically, we're going to be here, but we're going to walk in our mind and we're going to let it wander a little bit. What I want you to do is to imagine yourself somewhere amazing 1 year from today. What is this desired future state? Where are you? What are you doing? So when we talk about goal setting, we'll often say you need to have a vision board to visualize where it is that you are, who you're talking to, what activities you're doing. So I've given you some prompts. If you need to, close your eye for a minute and follow along. Let's see where this goes. I want you to imagine yourself, if everything is going well for your personal and professional life, what are you doing in 1 year? Where are you? What place or space are you in? What activities are you doing? Who are you seeing? What do you see? What are you saying, thinking, and feeling? Do you have that? I want you to visualize that. So I'm going to do the same, but I'm going to give you a moment to think about it. Did you imagine yourself on the beach in Hawaii, maybe in Fiji or Maui, and you're sitting there at sundown, the weather's perfect, there's a gentle breeze on your face, you're wearing a blue and white print shirt, and it's just right before dinner, and you're about to enter into a conference where you're going to learn amazing things, but more importantly, you're going to be the speaker. How do you feel after you envision where you're going to be in 1 year from today if all goes well? Now, what if I told you you don't have to wait and you can go there now? How would you feel? Would you be filled with excitement? Are you smiling from ear to ear? This is the power of stylescapes. Brian Collins once said on our show, books are like rocket ships. They can take you to distant places. Well, I think stylescapes are the rocket ship for businesses. You can help your client visualize where they're going to be 1 year from today really fast. Okay, so here's an example for one of our clients. So this is the stylescape, and from this, we were able to get a lot of clarity and direction. So what I want to show you here is designs that we produce or mock-ups that we produce to help the clients visualize where their brand was going to go. And they were so excited about this. They were filled with so much joy that although they came into it thinking we're only going to tackle a few things for them, they wound up expanding the scope to a degree in which we wound up designing the interior of a showroom for one of their offices. How cool is that? So when I talk about the purpose of stylescapes, I'm really talking about capturing the imagination and getting somebody to fall in love with their own brand, their own design, their own identity. And you are the person who delivered this to them, so that gives you a lot of power and influence. That sounds pretty good, right? Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Hopefully right now, I've also created a desired future state in your mind and you're leaning in. Chris, tell us more, stop beating around the bush. So here we go. Step 1, what we need to do is do brand attributes. Now, when we're doing discovery and strategy, there are many components to it. You'd have to build user personas, brand attributes, do the goals and prioritization exercise, and talk about the conversion funnel before you can do any design work. And that's a lot. And maybe that's not what you need right now. So I want to focus on getting you a quick win, and we want to focus in on the brand attributes. Okay, brand attributes. Now, I've given you a couple of prompts to think about, and you would do this exercise with the client, but you could also do it on your own. And here's what you do. Describe the brand in its desired future state, meaning 1 year from now, what does this brand or this company, this organization, this institution want to do with itself? What do we aspire to become? Now, in terms of the voice, the tone, the look and feel, how would we describe this? So ideate, generate a bunch of different ideas. Now, if you're dealing with a small group of people, sometimes it's hard to come up with these words. So here's where I really recommend having a thesaurus handy so that you can look up words and contribute to the conversation. You're looking for very precise words that don't feel generic that all companies say. And it's hard to get there. If you're dealing with a slightly larger group and they want to contribute, I have a suggestion here. You could use the design sprint methodology and give everyone post-it notes, and they can just jot down as many ideas as they can. Say, give them 5 minutes to do it, and they would write down as many words that they can think of to describe the voice and the tone, the look and feel of the desired future state of this brand. Once everybody's done, have everybody put the post-it notes up on the wall, and then you can give everyone 5 red dots, 5 little red dots, and then they can put it on the words that they connect and identify with the most. You pick out the 3 with the most red dots, and that's what we're going to build our stylescapes on. Now, the instruction here is people can put all the red dots on one, or they can spread them out. There are no rules, or they can put it on none. It doesn't matter because you'll just pick the one that has the 3 most voted attributes. Once you are able to reduce it onto 3 words, looking at this funnel, the voice, tone, look, and feel, you'll be able to continue. Here's an example. What could this be? This could be rustic, authentic, and industrial. It could be vibrant, trendy, and comforting, or historic, refined, and glamorous. Now, these are actual attributes that we did for one of our clients. Step 3, the empathy map. If you search on the internet, you'll find something similar to this, and I've put them together. An empathy map allows you to look at the world through someone else's eyes. That's what you're trying to do. You want to walk in their shoes. So we want to think, feel, believe what this person believes. We want to hear what they hear and see what they see. We also want to imagine what they're saying and doing. And underneath this, just for the detail and for your reference, their pains and gains around the tasks that they have to do at both home and at work. The empathy map allows you to identify and walk in their shoes. So who is this person? Do you know them well enough so that you could pick them out from a crowd? So I found this image on one of these free stock sites, and I think this guy is great. He's got a big hearty laugh. He's got these really interesting glasses, these sunglasses, the watch that he's wearing and the patterned shirt, but he's not so stuffy. He's got it unbuttoned and he's on his iPhone. So he's into technology. And so he's a really cool person. And I think I start to know what his world looks like. Some other prompts for you to think about. Where do they live? What do they do inside and outside of work? What do they drink and eat? So here's an empathy map that I did for somebody that's living a really active lifestyle. She's probably in the marketing department at some agency or design studio. She lives in Chicago, but she's really connected to outdoors and nature. She does kickboxing, yoga. She drinks and eats really healthy foods. This is her life, and this is possibly where she works. Now, I don't have to be this person to imagine what it is like to live their life. What places and spaces do they visit? What do they see, hear, and touch? Because this particular client was for a project in Pioneer Square in Seattle in this historic district, I tried to imagine what it looks like. So this is what Google is really good for as well. So we get Google Street View or kind of images from the street to kind of get a sense of walking in the city on the street, the sights, the sound, and the smells that we're going to experience. I imagine some friends meeting up during lunch at this place, and I like the topography on the wall, this desaturated kind of blue-gray trim on the wood around the windows, and this very kind of light pistachio or mint color paint on the columns. I like the topography. I imagine that this is near the water, which it is, and so hence we've included some lettering that literally says water. I see these very dark slate colors with a bronze or a weathered gold finish to it. So you see like how this is painting a picture in my mind. I even like this photograph where there's a pin stuck in where it says Seattle, by the water in the grid. Where do they shop and relax? What things do they crave? Again, I'm trying to inhabit this person's world. So when they walk in the store, what kind of images do they see? And you can see in the photography and examples I've included here, this black and white stationery system that's in the bottom middle, leather belts, certain kinds of pants and material, the lettering, even this box of for Merchant and Mills, where you see this illustration style for the scissors that is a throwback to a Sears and Roebuck catalog. That's really cool. This assortment of images, typography, grid systems, black and white packaging with the cardboard really speak to me in terms of who this person might be. I even love the illustration of the octopus. Really super cool. And these nautical themes that are coming through. Again, it's by the ocean. I'm including things in here like this painting that's been painted on top of what looks to me like a map or some sort, and it's got a really cool vibe. That might inspire hiring an illustrator that does something like that. I like the topography on this very centered layout for 12th and London, for 16th at Berlin. Something really cool. Now, normally I'm not a fan of centered topography, but this feels appropriate for this. I also like the hand-dipped dyed indigo ink that's for these tied cards that are leaning against the wall. That looks really cool. Or these very natural bottles, these dark evergreen bottles with the white topography. Even the guy who stands there, he feels like he could live in this world. So you see, this is all coming together. I wanted to point out something else here too. Those potato chips. You see that graphic in the back? Those are actually symbols, I believe, taken from nautical flags. Pretty cool. Step number 2, create image buckets. Now, we've included some resources to help you find the best images. And the top 3 for me are Pinterest, Behance, Dribbble. There are other ones here that include Shutterstock, things that are free like Unsplash. Creative Market is a great resource. Death to Stock Photos, Pexels is free, or Gratisography, which is one photographer who's giving you access to his photos and allows you to use them for free. What you want to do is to pick as many images off the internet that align to these 3 attributes. So in this example here, I've chosen rustic, authentic, and industrial. So what I want you to do is go search for people, environments, packaging, letters, colors, textures, architecture, interiors, typography, illustrations, photography, color grading like the way images look, objects, identity systems, wayfinding, which is a fancy way to say signage, fabrics, symbols, lifestyle, furniture, and icons, or anything that you can come up with that signals something to you that you can be inspired by. I personally love Pinterest. So this is actually one of my boards for rustic industrial interiors. Now, if you're like me, you can lose yourself in Pinterest, and I love it. It's going down the rabbit hole. Sometimes I wake up at my desktop finding that now it's 3 in the morning and I've been on Pinterest for hours. It's a lovely resource, a great brainstorming tool and partner. Highly recommend that you use it. So I'm going to abstract this a little bit to make this part visual, but Essentially, image buckets are folders where you dump a bunch of assets into. So the three that I picked just to show you, one is lifestyle. So this is a bunch of curated images that I pulled to try to see if I understand the lifestyle of somebody that's in this kind of rustic, authentic place. So I'll include images of a mountain and a truck with lots of trees, or this kind of specific watch, or the shot through a window of an airplane. And notice also the color correction, it's grouped together, and the style of photography, it says something. And I want to immerse myself into this world. So here's a bunch of images that fit in the interior bucket. Steel and glass windows, polished floors, exposed concrete, etc., and steel doors for an elevator. Here's an example of an image bucket for wayfinding. You'll see that I'm including all kinds of things. So first, you'll see this number 39, which is painted on the wall. You'll see this reference later, and I think that's really cool. I like the typeface, I like the typeset, something really cool about that. Also, I'm including this extruded metal steel, blackened steel sign number 5, because this is going to spawn an idea somewhere, possibly. I also like this Morgan's painted sign on the brick wall that's kind of washed out and weathered a little bit. This reclaimed chipboard with the white refined poster attached on top, I think is a really nice contrast, and I like that. I also like these steel numbers that's on the bottom right from 1 through 6 and the little hint of color. I like how it's a mix between really industrial and something that's refined and designed. So this is really starting to paint something in my mind, and hopefully in the mind of my client. And I'll show you how to deal with this in a little bit. Okay, step 4, color and type. Color is really important, and it's a question that a lot of people ask us, Chris, what about color harmonies? What's your color theory? Like, how do I pick the right colors for the brand that I'm doing? Okay, well, here's a quote from Bob Cruz from Prototyper. Now, this is a statistic, and it may or may not be true, but that's besides the point. I think the sentiment is true. 90% of a consumer's assessment of a company or brand is made by color alone. Now, when I go into an art gallery, more often than not, I'm drawn in by the colors that the artists use. When you're looking at a jacket or a sofa or a pillow or something, usually first you see the color and you're either attracted to it or it repels you. So think about the color. So I've included some examples here of color palettes that maybe are not normally something I would use, but are very inspiring. This one has that orange and that kind of salmon-y pink color that's very in trend right now, Pantone color of the year kind of stuff. I also see the graphic and black patterns, the color blocking, and it's really nice. And I'm getting an idea for the color palette that I could use based on just this image alone. Now, to flip that a little bit, I also like this really brilliant deep red against this more washed out pale blue, or these hands counting 1, 2, 3. I believe this is CG, but it could be porcelain, that it's mostly this cool white and these cool shadows against this mauve or mauve pinkish color. I think that's really cool. Or maybe you're into this dipped strawberry, this really bright, vivid yellow chartreuse green dipped in the white against the blue. Very soothing and cool at the same time. And last but not least, maybe it's just some palm fronds against this mint washed wall. I think that could be really cool. So what you're looking for are color schemes, harmonies, and symbolism. Well, I have a little resource for you here. Colormatters.com is a good resource. Go to there to find the psychology of colors. Now, I'm a little bit on the fence on color theory and color psychology. The reason why is I remember early in my days at Art Center, one of my professors, when the students said, don't colors symbolize meaning? Well, he asked the class, what does the color red symbolize? And some people will say danger, violence, murder, mystery, sinister, Satan. And everybody seemed to nod in agreement. He says, well, what's the color for Valentine or Santa Claus? You see, color, absent context, doesn't really have a lot of meaning. But if you want to dive a little bit deeper, you can look at this resource and figure out what other people are saying about what colors mean and what psychological effects they might have. They also include something called color forecasting, which if you're interested in what colors become trendy or come out of trend, then you can look at that as well. Another one of my favorite resources is color.adobe.com. If you go to color.adobe.com, go to the middle tab where it says Explore. There you can search for phrases and see what other people identify as being associated with those phrases. So here I've typed in fun and vibrant. And yes, these color palettes do look fun and vibrant. So if you're ever looking for a resource for color ideas, go to color.adobe and you'll get a bunch of ideas. And you can even zoom in, and then you can see here with greater detail what other people are saying about it as well. How many people are using it? How many thumbs up does it have? So then you can get some kind of consensus and do a little color research on your own. Another great resource is colorexplorer.com. You can actually feed it an image and it will generate a color palette based on some parameters that you give it. This is pretty cool. So if you're inspired by a painting, you can feed it and it'll generate a color palette. Now, how it does this, I do not know. The accuracy of it, I do not know, but it's an interesting way to pull colors out. You can even specify how many colors from this image do you want to pull. You can see here, I specified 10. What's also really interesting about this particular website and this tool is you can then adjust the sliders to switch up the hue, the saturation. You can increase the red, green, and blue. So you can even dial in your specific color palette. And then you can either screen capture it, save it, or store it as part of a swatch library you can use later. Next up, colorlovers.com. Color Lovers is a bunch of color palettes, and what I really like about this website is you don't even have to think. You can just look for things that you like, and if it speaks to you, use it. Give it a shot and see what happens. What I also like about this is you notice on the right-hand side, it doesn't organize the colors as even swatches. It shows it to you in proportion, which is kind of a nice thing to do. Because sometimes when you show all colors evenly, a client might assume, are we going to see this much of that particular color? So a way that you can represent it is to show it in a proportionate scale. So on the very top one, you can see that the kind of very washed out purple color, the lavender color, is the most dominant. It's got some browns and some mint colors, while the red and pink hues are a little bit more minimal. Another resource is colorhunter.com, and it's probably one of the most simple resources here. Again, I fed it an image, and this is what it came up with. Now you'll notice if you reference back to the other slide, even though they were fed the same images, they generated very different color palettes. So I think this is kind of amusing how software interprets things. But I think this is really cool. You can even check out this Instagram account where they include an image and they've started to pull out colors from it. And they've turned a simple feed into a resource about colors. I think that's pretty cool and smart. Next up is type. Here are some resources for you. And some of my favorite are Typekit, Monotype, Font Shop, and for some really wacky typefaces, T26. We've also included resources for lesser known foundries, but they're really high quality typefaces. What you want to do is you want to audition a typeface. You want to try it out before you purchase it or use it. And this is how we do logo sketching. So in this case, I typed in the word the future and I did it at the largest point size available. If you screen capture it, you can then use it in your designs for your clients. You can auto trace this. And if they love it, you have the option then to buy it, or you can just redraw it. Because apparently, according to copyright rules, you cannot copyright a typeface. You can copyright the code, but since you're redrawing it, you'll be okay. Again, I want to put an asterisk in this because I am not an attorney, but I did consult one. What I want you to do too is when you're presenting your stylescape is to include a type specimen. Now, this is a term that you're familiar with if you're a graphic designer because when foundries would release typefaces, they include type specimen. And a type specimen allows somebody like you or me to get excited about the typeface in its use and its application. So we like to include at least a sentence, and if you're going to use just one sentence, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, I believe, contains every letter in the entire alphabet. You can check right now. Step number 5. To curate. What we want to do is now take all these images, the empathy graph, the color palette, the typography, all the little designs that you've researched and found. We want to be able to assemble these with intention and place it within the stylescape. I've given you a lot of different tools, and the reason why I've done that is because the process is what I would describe as a double funnel system. It's like an hourglass, okay? You start broad, you narrow things down, you find the direction, and from that direction you go broad again until you make the stylescape, and now you're gonna narrow everything down. You're gonna do it with great intention. So here's a diagram of what a stylescape could possibly look like. Generally speaking, when you're assembling these things, I would start with the person. So it's very important that you find the right image for the person that's going to represent the user of this product, service, or brand. who's their ideal customer. Once you have that, and you can use the included Keynote template, and there's a PowerPoint one for you, and you can just drop it in. At this point, I want to point out to you, it doesn't really matter what software you use as long as you have proficiency in using it. It's very easy for you to move things around and swap out images. For my money and for ease of use, Keynote is the way to go, and it's included, I believe, with every Macintosh computer. Now, you might be thinking, Chris, why go with this really wide landscape format and not a portrait format? And I'll tell you why. Originally, when stylescapes were used, and the person who taught it to me was doing it for websites. So when you use the portrait or the vertical skyscraper format, what happens is people then interpret that as you're building me a website, and is this what my website's going to look like? And so to change the narrative around that, to not allow there to be confusion, we do the landscape format. I prefer the landscape format also for a number of different reasons. At least in the West, we read from left to right. So we want to arrange it in a landscape format to tell a little bit of a story. As our eye moves from the user, what are they doing, what activities, where might they go, what might they see? So then you can tell a story across the entire landscape from left to right. Now I'm going to give you 3 additional prompts. And the reason why I'm going to do this is because typically speaking, if the project warrants it, we like to give our clients 3 options, 3 stylescapes. So here are the prompts: mild, medium, and spicy. And they're exactly like the way they sound, okay? Mild is what I would consider what is the most expected direction to go in, given the brand attributes that you talked about. So when the client said we want it to be elegant, we want it to be timeless, come up with what you think fits with their user persona, their brand attributes, and align the images around that. Spicy, on the other hand, is using those same brand attributes, but going towards the edge of what somebody might associate with those words, those characteristics, those attributes. Spicy is what we consider are on the fringe or the edge of those attributes. They're still related, but we're pushing pretty far out. So another way to look at this is mild is the first child, the firstborn child, whereas spicy is the third cousin. We're still related. There's some shared DNA, but we're really getting pretty far out now, okay? And medium is just the one in the middle. It's easiest to approach it that way. Now, if you're doing this yourself, you might find it really difficult to stretch yourself so that each one of these things look very different from each other, and that's needed for it to be a healthy dialogue about what direction to go down. If you're having a problem doing that, what I would recommend then is you bring in another creative. If they have a propensity towards doing very conservative design, let them do the mild one. If they're crazy in punk rock and they really want to push the edges and look for the new and the avant-garde, let them do the spicy one. This one I learned from Douglas Davis in his book, Creative Strategy and the Business of Design. He has the 3 R's: rainbow, rhinoceros, and rhombus, and I love these, okay? Rainbow is inspired by the colors of the brand, the product, the service. So if they have an interesting color palette, build something off that, or the theme is all based on the color. And I'll show you what I mean in a little bit. Rhinoceros is built on the brand's strength. So if it's a product or a service that's been around for a really long time, that's how you angle it. So you angle the historic aspect, or maybe they're a really interesting location in a historic district. So you apply that up and you would dig into that. Rhombus is really built on the shape. What of this shape is unique, and build off that. So maybe you're working with an existing logo and it has a lot of triangular shapes. Maybe that's a jumping off point, and you can curate images around triangular shapes. And that's it, the 3 R's: rainbow, rhinoceros, and rhombus. Give it a try. Step 6, presentation. I'm going to give you tips on how to present and talk about stylescapes so that you can have the easiest, low friction conversation with your client. So how to introduce stylescapes into your client workflow. It looks something like this. 1 is you want to set expectations. So we do that by defining what stylescapes are and what they're not. We want to highlight the advantages of doing it and tell them ultimately stylescapes saves you time and money. So I've written a little script for you on how to describe it if you've never described it before. And take some liberty with this, but this is how I'm going to say it, okay? And the reason why I do this in the story format is because it allows us to have a more natural conversation around it. So here's what I would say if I'm meeting with a client. In the past, I used to go through a process whereby I worked independently after an initial client meeting. For the most part, it worked, except on occasion, some clients didn't like the result. This cost both of us time and money, and I'm sure you'd like to avoid that. Since then, I've adopted Stylescapes, which is a rapid design prototyping tool, into my workflow. It's a highly curated collection of found images from the internet that gives you a high fidelity glimpse into the direction in which we'll be heading. That way, if we miss the mark early, you'll know. We can make adjustments before committing to the design phase. How does this sound, Mr. and Mrs. Client? All right, that's a mouthful. I don't expect you to memorize it or say it, but I wrote it in the most thorough way, so at least you have some nuance of understanding how we talk about these things. So what I would advise you to do after you complete this course is to write your own version of this and memorize it. Commit it to memory so that it becomes natural to part of how you explain Stylescapes. And if at the end of the day, you can't remember anything, just say, we want to have a glimpse into the future without committing a lot of time and resources. And this is why we do Stylescapes. How much should you charge, or should you charge at all? And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. Okay, so let's talk about this. I've included now a sample from one of our proposals that we sent out not that long ago, and you can see the language we use, okay? So this is a rather large project and it has multiple phases, so you can have this as reference, okay? And this is how we describe the language as well. So if you keep diving into this, we usually say we include 3 Stylescapes. Now we don't break it apart in this case, in this bid, but you're more than welcome to do it. You can say, if you're just designing a logo, say logo and identity design, and then you can also use Stylescape and create a separate line item. In the beginning, what I would suggest, if you've never done this before for a client, is ask for $1,000 to do Stylescapes first. This sets some kind of value against the project, and it asks them to acknowledge that this is what we're gonna do. If they commit to it, fantastic, next time charge a little bit more. If they don't, you can be flexible and say, you know what, I understand you don't wanna do this and there's some reservation. I'm just going to take it upon myself to do it so that you can see it, and you let me know later if it was worthwhile to do or not. Now, why do we want to assign a dollar amount to it, even if we're going to do it for free? Because I don't want you to set the expectation that this is free work and that it's not valuable. You see, because people buy based on emotion, and then they use logic to rationalize it later. So they might feel the project's going great, and what a great guy Chris is, because he did $1,000 worth of work for me for free on top of this, and I love the process. How many Stylescapes should you present? The short answer is 3, because we need context, right? You can say my friend's really tall, and my friend's 6 foot tall. But standing next to Shaquille O'Neal, my friend's not so tall anymore. So when you show just one Stylescape, if you're not that confident about it, what happens is, even if it's great, clients will wonder, is there more? And that's going to create some doubt in their mind. So create 3 that you love, and show that. Over time, if you feel like you don't need to do that anymore, you can do just 1. And we've done both. How should you present? In person or remote? And are there strategies for each? And yes, there are. Okay. So if you're doing an in-person presentation, we recommend having large color prints mounted on foam core board. I like them about this wide. Maybe that's like 3 feet, so that we can look at it and we can see the detail. I've known other people to print really wide ones, like 5 or 6 feet long, and you can do that as well. You can bring them in. They're an interesting conversation starter, and people love seeing tangible things. Now, if you're eco-conscious, there's another way you can do this. And here's where I usually will come in with a keynote deck that I can present on their monitors. But I need to make sure that they have a high resolution, color accurate monitor so we can look at it together. And the reason why I like presenting this way, A, it saves paper, we don't need to waste more paper. And B, they cannot look at anything other than what I want them to see in the order in which I want them to see it. Okay, if you're going to do a remote presentation, there's a couple of ways to do this. I'm gonna tell you one way, but you're gonna find your own way, okay? So what I wanna do is, after you've locked in a presentation date and time, 24 hours before, somewhere towards the end of the day, I will send the clients a PDF file. So this is not editable. I'm not gonna send them the Keynote deck, just send them a PDF file, and you can do that straight out of Keynote, okay? Export a PDF. And the letter that I will write will sound something like this. So this is for my client, Mary. Hi, Mary. I just wanted to give you a peek at the stylescapes ahead of our call tomorrow. Don't look too deeply into it as I'll walk you through what it is and how to look at it. Can't wait to hear your feedback. And that's it. So I want them to take a glimpse of it so it doesn't shock them, but I don't want them to stare at it and study it too deeply. More often than not, if you're doing stylescapes and you've done a good job, and if you follow the directions which I've given you, they should be really excited to talk to you the next day because they're super excited about this future that you've created for them. What is the tone and state of mind that you need to have? One is I want you to adopt a helpful and optimistic tone when you're talking to your client, whether it's in person or over the phone, that you communicate to them that anything can change. There's low commitment to what we've done. What we really want to do is hear their honest feedback and see if we're moving in the right direction. This is how we work together. So here's the example that I promised. So this is something that we're undergoing right now. We're helping out a friend of mine, Joey Corman. He's the founder of the School of Motion, and that's his logo, these 3 triangles. And 3 words that we decided together was flexible, premium, and clean. Now those on the surface are pretty generic words. So in this case, I really decided to do the rainbow technique. And if you look at it, this is really interesting. When these 3 triangles, the red and green blue triangle overlap, they create a secondary color, the yellow and the cyan, which is pretty cool. So I've been thinking about color. So when I went to present this, I really built it around the color and the shape. Overlapping shapes and colors is really what drove this design direction, okay? In a separate video, I will share with you how this was presented and what the actual client feedback from Joey was and how I responded to those comments. Okay, so after showing this stylescape, I got feedback. So this is the great part of stylescapes. A little bit of commitment from us, a couple days worth of work, assembling the right images, color correcting, cutting things out. And you know what he said to me? And you can see that there are some small changes. One, he said, this emo guy who's got tattoos and cool hair, he's a little too aspirational. Our users, our customers are a little bit geekier. They're the AV club people. They have a certain vibe to them. Most definitely, they probably have some facial hair. It's something like this other guy. So we swapped that out. And for whatever reason now, it feels much more natural to this world. I think we were trying to be too cool, too fashion model-like. The other thing he said is we're missing that sense of fun, the whimsy, and everything looks too clean. It almost looks too premium for us. So now you'll notice we introduce illustrations throughout the stylescape. And with those 2 tweaks, we're on the same page. So see how cool that was? All we needed to do was go and find a stock site and find an illustration style. And this one happens to be very much on trend with the small faces and the small hands and feet and the long legs, short torso. You know what style I'm talking about. So how does this translate into design? What do you do with the stylescapes? And are we worried that we're going to be accused of plagiarism, or if the clients fall in love with the stylescape and we can't reproduce it? Well, I'm going to show you exactly how we do this for the School of Motion. So you remember that stylescape with color gradients and everything? Well, look at this. Look at how it was translated. So we built a color palette with gradations, overlapping shapes, the right mix of illustration to graphic images, and our designer was able to do an incredible job here. You'll see how it informs the topography and this very lyrical quality to the shapes itself, the faces and the beard, the illustrations kind of walking in and out, always implying that we're kind of freezing a moment in time, that there's motion implied there. I think that's really cool. We were able to design these badges and their Facebook page and a whole lot more. So just from one stylescape that's very intentionally put together, we're able to then move really quickly and deep, knowing that the effort and energy we put into the work will not be wasted because the clients already have agreed to the general direction in which we're heading in. And it's not that hard to reverse engineer colors and shapes so that you can build your own. Remember, from a legal point of view, you should not, and I want to reinforce this, use any of the elements from the stylescape. This is just inspired by. You can reverse engineer this formula all day and night. Now I want to give you guys some examples, okay? This was done for a property in Seattle, the one we've been referring to before, for 450 Alaskan. This is for a large commercial real estate company for a property in Seattle, Washington, in the historic Pioneer Square. So we did 3 stylescapes, and I want to show you something here. So this is how we present. We'll talk about it. Sometimes we'll come up with a name for each stylescape so they become really memorable. So if you're really good at copywriting, I would advise you to do that because it makes the stylescape a little stickier and they can just refer to it instead of stylescape 1, 2, or 3. So you can refer to one as the Madonna or the Miley Cyrus or the Rebel, the James Dean, whatever it is that you want to do. Give it a name, have fun with it so it becomes really memorable. You'll notice here, in this example, we started to introduce a possible idea for a logo type. So if we're looking at this serif typeface, which has a really high X height, relatively speaking, and there's a little roughness to it, we will go onto one of those type boundaries, type something in, scan it, copy it, put it in here, because we want to get the client to become acclimated to the logo and the visual language that we're building together. You notice there's a gentleman here, he's on his phone, he's wearing a jacket, some kind of parka, he's wearing jeans, and he's got a button-down shirt. See, this captures the local market. Our clients, I remember saying to us, this is not LA, this is not Hollywood, it's not about slick and power suits and a certain look. We're more down to earth. People are less likely to drive flashy cars. It would be viewed as gaudy here in Seattle. So we try to capture all that, and in one image, it tells you a story, and that's what we want to do. Another tip for you here is that when you're working on this, ask yourself, why am I including this image in this stylescape? And if you can't find a reason, get rid of it. And what do I mean by that? So if there's a bottle that you want to include and you just want to focus on the label at the top, the lid, and nothing else, crop into it. And don't worry if the resolution is falling apart. You're trying to direct their eye and attention towards something. So you should be able to talk about each and every one of these parts. And the reason why you want to do that is ultimately if they pick this direction, you want to be able to then quickly turn around to your design team or yourself and say, look, now we know what this is going to look like. So you'll see us, we'll go and we'll cut out images, the building. We'll find, in this case, on the far left side, and let me zoom in on that. On the far left side, where it says Alaskan, we found this magazine, newspaper, and we swapped out the masthead for Alaskan using this typeface. So the more creative ways that we can put the logo type and the design system together at this early stage, the better we're going to do. You notice also there's some large typography behind the stairway against a corrugated metal background. That's also really cool. Remember that number 39? There it is popping its head up again, okay? And some design tips here is we like to use grid systems because everything stays nice and orderly. So if you stick with the grid system, you're gonna do really well. But we also like to break the grid system so everything doesn't feel so boxy. Type is good for that. Some round shapes and human beings are good for that too. So mix it up. And here's the right side. The reason why I wanted to show it to you in this sequence is we'll typically show the clients this way, where it's the wide, they can see everything, and then we'll zoom in at 200%, and then we'll just pan over to the right. This way they can focus on the details. For the rest of this deck and this course, I'm not gonna show you the zoomed in view. I'm gonna assume you understand what I'm talking about. So here's stylescape number 2 for the same project. So this one is what we would consider the medium. So our guy is aged down a little bit. He's wearing a jacket. Still, it's got that Seattle vibe going, right? The beard and all. And we're using a lot of maps here with the lines, the topography. I think that looks really smart. And you can see that we've included the lamp, booklets, survival manuals, and this idea of a stamped image. So you can take a clean logo and you can put it as a rubber stamp on stuff and it looks really cool. And this distressed X that you see on the bottom lower right. So this makes up the palette of what we're thinking. Last, this is the spicy version of the stylescapes. We're really kind of pushing the edges here. Notice the guy that we're using, the user persona. This person is much cooler and hipper than the first two. And I want to point this out in a couple different reasons. One, he's like this bearded guy he looks like an adventurer, an explorer. He's got a really cool scarf draped around his neck. He's got the watch. He's fit. He's got this laissez-faire, carefree attitude. Look at him. But he's also kind of squinting his eyes and thinking about things. The reason why I want to take a moment to talk about this is because when you're building a stylescape, This person needs to fit within this world, or should I say, the world in which you've created needs to fit the vibe of the person. So spend a lot of time looking for the right person and make sure they belong together. A couple things I wanted to point out here. Notice the color palette now, it's much more vibrant. This is really on the edge of what we would use. And what really drove this is some of the architecture that we found, the floating shipping containers had this really bright red, and that kind of sparked the whole conversation, like maybe we can push this a little bit. Some of the topography is inspired by sailboats and the mast. The mast, as you know, is a transparent, translucent material, and when you put them up against the light, you can see the 450 reading one way, and you can see 450 flip the other way because it's being seen through. I remember telling the client this, and they're like, wow, that's really smart, I like that. And instantly that became the lightning rod to bring the client to this one. And no surprise, this is the direction in which they picked. So it's kind of interesting where you would think, there's no way that they would pick this. This is so far off the beaten path. But when they see what they expect, something in the middle, they get to determine how much risk they want to take and how far they want to push it. Isn't this much better than you doing one kind of direction, only to find out later they're having second thoughts? When you take them through this process, you're involving them in your black box, your creative box, and then they get to make the decision together and with you. It's much more collaborative. Okay, here's another one for some local LA star architects if you will, EYRC. This is actually a client of ours, and I'm going to quickly show you. This one is very different because the user persona, the buyer, is usually a woman leading some kind of institution, upper education. They want to build a new building. So we want to reflect her world. So we're using softer tones. We're using natural materials, much more organic shapes, and we're mixing sans serif and serif typefaces for Ehrlich architects. And the reason why we did this is we want to try the idea out, low commitment, to see how far they want to play around with the topography. Here's another one where we've aged the woman up, and it's much more sophisticated, it's refined, the color palette is much more muted, and the references are there to reflect that. Notice now we're also including blueprints because that's part of the language of architects, and swatches of materials, the herringbone pattern, the concrete, the marble, all that kind of stuff. We're really trying to paint a complete picture in a palette. The reason why we include those textures also, because sometimes your client will see it and then it'll spark an idea. So it's almost like a Rorschach test, and then they will tell you what they can use it for. Or they might ask you, we never thought about using those materials. Maybe you can consult for us for another project. See, the door opens up for you then. This one's the last one, and this is the closest one to the direction that we ultimately landed on for this particular architect. And there's some really cool typographic things that are going on, and just a simple, almost museum-like quality where the topography is a little bit more understated, and it's just using beautiful letter spacing and typefaces to really communicate the essence of the brand. Here's one for a tech company. I wanted to include this because a lot of you are going to watch this and say, well, what if you don't do logo and identity systems? What if you're already given a logo to work with? Well, in this case, you can use the stylescape to inform the UI of the project. Here's the mild stylescape. Here's the medium. And here's the spicy. You see the range here? And it's very important for you to go through this with your client, because a lot of times your clients, if they're not shown the mild version, they're going to demand to go there. But once they see it and they see something that's a little bit more exciting and vibrant and fun and where they can project themselves into the future, this is where the stylescapes have a lot of power. They'll do all the convincing for you. Okay, so for this one, I'll give you a second to guess which one they picked. Did they pick the mild, medium, or spicy? This is a telecom company back east. If you guess medium, you guess correctly. So we got a little bit of feedback, so we dove in a little deeper and refined this. You can see that we're playing around with shapes and trying to figure out some kind of visual language design system. And the words here are friendly, clean, and playful. And that's important for the strategy of this particular company because tech can be intimidating. And they want to be sure that they come across different, that they're not so cold. So this is a guy, a potential client. Notice he's wearing a t-shirt, a v-neck shirt. His glasses say he's an intelligent person maybe, but he's got a little bit of a beard, a little bit of growth there. So This really paints the picture for the client to understand that this will work for their intended user. Now, again, I'm going to show you the design and how we translated that specific stylescape into a real project. So again, the stylescape informs the direction. It is not the direction. So we built out custom icons, custom graphic systems that you can see here, and we're going to teach them how to use the system. Rounded corners, certain shapes. This communicates the essence of the brand. This even informed the navigation system in terms of the color palette and the design that they were drawn to. So we'll just use this and build off of it. UI elements. And there's this other brand called The Future. So even for us, we need to do this because we need to commit to a design language and to share it across our entire team, both in-house and remote, so that everybody is on the same page when it comes to the brand. So we started off here. We did something that's very dark with hits of blue. Felt a little oppressive for us, even though it's slick and cool. Then we moved into this space where it's more colorful. We considered this as well. And there's some really beautiful photography here, which really excited me. And then we did one where it's really clean and a little bit more open. They're all very similar because we know our visual language and we're doing it for ourselves, okay? Here's another one that we did for one of our clients, Indie Mogul, which is a YouTube channel where they teach independent filmmakers how to do what they do for a lot less money. So we knew here that the user was going to be like this guy in the shot. He looks to me like he's mixed race. He could be Puerto Rican, African American with a little Latino in him. He seems to be representative of the demographics they're going after. He's holding a DSLR with a really long lens. He seems super intense and focused on what it is he's trying to do. When talking to the client, they told us Indie Mogul needs to have a certain kind of street vibe to it. So we drew from these inspiration. And when my designer was working on this, she showed me the stack of VHS tapes, and I thought this is really beautiful. And you'll notice on the bottom there, there's even a stack of film. I thought, how cool, look at those colors. Let's pull the colors out from that and let's let that inform the project. Let's also make sure we have a lot of hand-done things. And the stack of film reminded me of this collaboration between Girl Skateboards and Kodak. So I asked her to go find that, and that felt like the perfect synthesis of film, street, urban, and it's just all captured in one image. So you can see the power of this, right? And imagine presenting this to a client that wasn't that cool or hip, and they saw that, they're thinking, wow, that's a cool promotional item. Can you help us design some skateboards? Or maybe there's other things you can design for us. And that opens up the dialogue for other business. We took the same person and we did a second stylescape, and you can see, although they are different, you could, if you weren't paying attention, they could almost be the same. It doesn't have that same bright, brilliant green and red, but it's got a lot of black and yellow. And the client really liked the poster, the festival film for the Black Montreal Film Festival, I believe that's what that is, and the color blocking. But they're like, you know what? This feels a little bit too sophisticated. I even loved the luggage tags that you're seeing here from Stockholm, wherever else we're going. So what we were able to do is pick some of these elements and allow it to influence the first stylescape. And with that, the clients approved it. We moved into designing applications. So once again, I'm going to show you how to translate the stylescape into actual design. And if you remember the stylescape, you can now reference this and see like, yes, they're related, but we're not stealing elements, okay? Now I'm going to show you the business cards, and you can see that we're using this design, this logo, this extruded yellow box that's represented by corner, showing movement, and also it's a framing device as if a director is holding up two hands like this to frame the shot. And that becomes the visual language. And you can see how the colors translate, the kind of rough, hand-torn, hand-spray painted edges, and these arrows, everything's really kinetic and dynamic. There's some handwritten elements to it, and you can see how we bring it all together. And I love these posters. I don't know what they're going to use them for, but see how that all translates? And we're taking the fewest number of steps, and we have the greatest confidence in doing these designs, and we can go pretty deep. We can use all our design muscle to do this because we know it will not be wasted effort. And just for fun, our designer threw in this cassette tape. It has nothing to do with what they're doing, but it's just kind of a nice way to visualize the entire brand. And these are end pages probably, or graphic transitions. Okay, Now we come to the part where you stop listening to me and you actually roll up your sleeves and get some work done to see if you can apply what you've learned. So here's the assignment. What I want you to do, I want you to do this for yourself. So if you're going to do a stylescape for the very first time, why not do one for yourself? So I want you to think about your ideal customer. Who is it that you'd like to work with more? So this will have a double value for you. So if you're in the process of rebranding or thinking about rebranding, let's see if we can't paint a picture of where you'd like to go. I want you to build an empathy map, just the way we taught you, to try to understand what they hear, see, think, feel, say, and do, and try to build images around that. Assemble an image bucket. Pull in all the references that you want. And what I want you to do is also to define your 3 brand attributes to attract this customer. Now, you could say, like, I'm really cool, my clients will come to me. But the easier path is, I like these kinds of customers, I will come to them. And so if you can visualize these people, what they're doing, what they're thinking and saying, and if you align the visual language and the things that you say and do to match and mirror what they do, you will not seem like such a foreign choice. Now remember, I've said this before on Twitter, that people do not pick the best option. They pick the least risky option. So your job as a creative is to seem like the lowest risk, that we speak the same language, we share the same values, and I have good taste. The way you do that is you match your taste to theirs, okay? I want you to curate and assemble all these images into one amazing stylescape. And you can submit this for review using the hashtag future stylescapes, and also use the hashtag the future. I can't promise I'm going to review all of yours, but if it hits me and there's something interesting, I'll do my best to try to comment or say something about it. But if you're also participating in this class, you can use the same hashtag to see what other people come up with. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do. So here's your checklist of what you want to do, okay? For the stylescape, you want to have a user photo. Be super specific about who this person is. Think about everything they're styling, what they're doing, the activity, how they're photographed, the color correction, because it says everything, and make sure they fit within the world that you designed for them. You also want to include a logo example. This is not the final logo, but it's a hint towards the final logo. So it's mostly a typeset, a configuration, using the tools that I talked about. You need to include a color palette, hopefully a primary and secondary one, to really kind of paint the world this person lives in. And you will include type specimen. So pick some typefaces that feel like they belong with this person and their world, okay? Here's some other things that you want to do. You want to include things like an identity system, graphics, patterns, and textures, things we've been talking about, materials, print collateral, contextually relevant applications. The skateboard is one of those examples. Wayfinding, again, that's just a fancy word to say signage. Photography examples, navigation design, printing and finishing techniques. Is it going to have a gold foil, deboss finish? Is it on rough paper that's uncoated stock? What are you using? Are there labels and rubber bands? All those kinds of things really tell us the visual language in which you're going to design for. I mentioned interface design and navigation, information graphics, exhibit design, and interior, exterior design, spaces and places. If you're not sure what all these things are, you can go to my Pinterest page after this course, and you can find some examples of each on my Pinterest account. Okay, before I wrap up, I want to critique a few stylescapes that were submitted to me ahead of time. And I want to first let you know I'm critiquing these not as judgment against the people who made them, but just as a learning opportunity for all of us to see what's going on. Now you're gonna look at this stylescape. Perhaps you've done this stylescape or something very similar to this, and you think this is perfectly adequate. Now here's the problem with this particular stylescape. One, the person. This person says a lot, but to me, it's super generic, and it's kind of a fictional thing. Like nobody really pulls their chest apart and bears it like Superman, right? So this person lives in a fantasy land, and I can see that this is for some kind of property management company called Champion. So they're finding the ultimate champion is Superman, and then they're including colors and typefaces, but it's not really sparking anything in me. I'm not really seeing where this is going to go as a design system. So this is very dangerous when you present a stylescape like this, and let's say the clients approve it. Now what? How do you design off of this? And so I don't have enough here to peel away the layers so that I can adequately give direction to a team and say, go make this thing. So this is spare. It's a little bit generic in terms of choosing this character and just showing a bunch of photographs of people celebrating deals, fist pumping in the air, and victory poses. Now, one of those is okay. Having 4 or 5 of them doesn't really move the conversation forward. So I think in this case, you need to go dive a little deeper. Show me what signage looks like. Show me an interior. What other things are they doing in the real world? That'll help me understand them a lot better. Okay, next up. This one's quite interesting, especially because it breaks up the grid. They've rotated the boxes, the image shapes, to a 45-degree angle, creating kind of a diamond pattern. And I think that's pretty cool. Now, once I get over that, what am I looking at here? What information am I able to extract from this? Well, I get a color palette. I understand there's a photography style about certain herbs and spices, medicinal things. And then I see an Asian man and a different Asian man and his daughter, I presume. So we're getting a sense of the lifestyle, but I'm not also able to design a lot of things based on this. Are there cool rubber stamp techniques? Are there printing things that we talked about? Can we include some packaging? What else can we include to really create a more complete picture? Remember, we're forecasting into the future. So Stylescape is not just a tool that you use to finish a job. A Stylescape captures the imagination. It gives the person who's looking at this, your client, just this excitement about where their brand can go. And you want to be the person who delivers this. Last up, this design is a lot more sophisticated. We can see that there's a very clear point of view in terms of who this person is. She's very chic. She's a little older. She's super stylish. Look at those fashionable glasses. This is a sophisticated woman, and this is the world in which she lives in. We get a sense of the hotel or her interior design sensibilities. We see a lot of photography, very consistent, very clear. We see icons and ferns and materials. Again, my critique is, how do we go deeper in this experience? How do I see more of a world? So I think this is 70% of the way there. Let's include more images and let's paint this out. Is there a shopping bag? Are there other items that you can think of that are dimensional that you can include? And then take this design home. Okay, some resources for you. Included in part of this course, aside from the video course that you're watching right now, are going to be Keynote PowerPoint templates, an email script, a bunch of examples of stylescapes, and a Photoshop demo showing you how I mask things out really quickly and how I color correct objects and isolate the color so that it feels really cohesive. And of course, we mentioned this, an actual client call giving me feedback and how I react to these things. And I'm gonna show you via time-lapse video how we build a stylescape from scratch. If you have questions, let me know online. Thank you and good luck. Okay, so in this video, I'm gonna walk you through how Min designs a stylescape, and I'm gonna talk about her process as she's working. Before you even start designing a stylescape, you have to be able to collect images. So what images are appropriate, what ones might fit or might not. One of the most fun things I like to do when starting a stylescape, I think about the 3 primary words or attributes that describe the brand. In this case, it's flexible, premium, and clean. So as you're filtering through your image buckets, look for things that communicate to you flexibility. What does flexible look like to you? Well, for us, being flexible might mean including organic shapes. So everything is not angular. Flexible might mean soft edges or gradients. Now, what does premium look like to you? Well, we know it when we see it. High-end finishes, really polished design, that Swiss modern, that feels very premium. So premium, at least by our interpretation, is simple, it's minimal, really restrained design. That also coincides nicely with the idea of being clean. Now you're allowed to interpret this any which way you want, but be consistent with how you select your images. You could say then, well, what's not appropriate? Maybe that's a better way to look at this. So images that are, at least to me, distressed grungy, layered, messy, maximalist design probably would not be a good fit for this. As I'm searching on Behance or on Pinterest or in Dribbble, anything that remotely sounds or looks like what it would fit or things I get excited by, I don't really think too much. I just grab that and put it in a folder. And if you can do this while you're working, it'll save you a lot of time. But I'm human and sometimes I get a little sloppy. I just have one giant folder and I start putting them all in there. And then I go through a second process of breaking the images down into subfolders based on commonalities, categories. We've mentioned before packaging, environments, typography, lettering samples, etc. So what you're doing is you're starting to filter and get a sense of what's right for this brand. See, that selection process helps you to weed things out that don't make sense. First thing that you're going to notice is Min has a really large and wide artboard, and she's working in Illustrator. So she has all her assets laid out. And part of the design process is to really try to figure out what works next to what. At this stage of the game, don't worry about getting things to be perfectly aligned or whether or not they snap to a particular grid. All we're looking for is to find good pairings of images. And when you find a good lockup, leave that alone and work on another part of the canvas. One of the things that we really like to do is to dial in the colors. So in what you're looking at right here, Min is dialing the shade of red on the buildings because the other shade of red wasn't as saturated and as brilliant and it'll stick out. So a lot of this is about finding things that don't belong together and then finding a way to make them feel like they fit. It just needs to be within the ballpark of the colors you've chosen. When selecting a user, it's good to find an image that doesn't feel like stock, that has some personality, and you get bonus points if they're doing something, not just standing there looking pretty for the camera. Once you find the right image, what you want to do is go in and cut it out. And when you're dropping it into the comp, you notice that Min has flipped the person over because you don't want a person looking out of the canvas. You want them looking into the canvas. And lastly, the color was not vibing with the rest of the design. It was too prominent and the shirt wasn't actually adding any design sense. We wanted to make it more neutral and gray it out. Just keep in mind, every time somebody looks at your stylescape, ask yourself this question: what do I want them to look at and why is this important for me to see? When it comes to adding typography and type examples, as you were instructed to include type specimen, it is preferred not to just put in Greek type, lorem ipsum type. What you want to do, if possible, if you've run core, have done any discovery, or you can look up their mission statement, copy the mission statement, format that in the typography and the layout style that you want, and that way when they see it, they can actually read it and it reminds them of what they're trying to do. These are little subtle cues and attention to detail that go a long way. Don't forget to include the 3 keywords that you've chosen. Those are visual anchors for people to remember why you chose the images that you chose. Oftentimes, if you don't put that there, you'll forget to speak about it and the client will forget as well. So then it becomes a game of subjective art direction where people say, well, that's not an image that I would include. You can just point back. Does that feel flexible, premium, and clean to you? If it does, then it probably should fit. All stylescapes need to include a color palette. And the color palette doesn't have to be presented in any particular way. You can use circles, you can use brush strokes, you can use boxes. And one thing that we like to do is to try to show the color palette as proportionate to how much we see being used in the total design. So if there's going to be a lot of white, we would make the white color palette much bigger. And if there's a little hint of yellow as an accent color, use the proportion of how you present it so that the client understands. And then your stylescape needs to reflect that as well. Given the template that you have, it's a tendency for everything to snap to grid to be evenly divided and to be aligned on their edges. That's fine and everything, but we want to break up the composition so that they're more natural flowing lines. So here are some examples on what you can do. First, you can introduce elements that are not straight, meaning square at 90 degrees. Put in a triangular element. That can break up the grid. Put in circular elements or things that are more organic in nature. Those things help to break it up. So you can see that Min's moving around the triangle, which is an element lifted off the logo itself. That's also a nice thing to kind of use that idea of repetition. So it reinforces the logo and it brings the design together. And in this case, she's making it point to the right, which I like because it feels like it's a play button. But once you focus on the 5, you know where else to go. It directs you to move to the right. Some other ways to break up the grid include using organic images that are at an angle and have little floaty elements. That breaks up the grid too. And you want to pick an image that isn't too contrasty because it becomes really distracting with that many components in it. Another way to break up the grid is just to create an element, like in this case, a rectangular box, and put it somewhere where it doesn't exactly snap to all the grid lines. That's another way to break it up. And a rule of thumb here is to use the rule of halves or thirds. So the dimension of the total box is 100%, make it 50%, or make it 33.3%. Your eye will pick up on these things even if your brain doesn't understand it. We like to see things repeated. Okay, that's how Min was able to finish the first stylescape, and then now I'm going to tell you what I think about it. Some of the issues, some of the feedback that I gave Min was, this guy feels a little bit on the generic side. He's too good looking, he's too Abercrombie and Fitch for this super geeky, nerdy audience that we're trying to go after, and that's part of the profile. Animators and designer and creative types maybe aspire to look like this guy with the square jaw and the perfect teeth, but in reality, that's not them. So I want to be able for them to look at this board and instantly recognize who their audience is. A couple other things here is like, I feel like this poster on the far right, the 2017-18 poster, doesn't fit with everything else. And some of the things are just jumping out at me that don't feel like they belong. These round black dots that are held together with that clip, that doesn't belong. I want to see more design examples. I need to see illustrations and icon sets so that we know how to build the entire identity system. So I'm going to redirect Min to go back at it and do round 2. Plus, I really enjoy seeing all the colors from the School of Motion logo, and I want to see more colors. What really caught my eye, the thing that caught my eye the most, was this set of cards, these business cards that had this really gradient, beautiful reflected light on the edges. And I think that was mostly a lighting play, but I really like that, and I'm really grooving on that. So I want to see more color, more gradients, and just really pump up the fun. Now, in the Stylescape number 2 here, you can see that Min's incorporated a lot of color. And now we're seeing it go in a drastically different direction here with all the colors. And even the photography style, you can see that this really cool woman with a crazy hairstyle with her hand on her face and using gelled lights, like cool and warm lights against her. I really like that. That's pretty cool. The person that's dropped into this image here, this guy with the beard and the hair, he feels a lot more like the animator that we're talking about. And notice here how Min moved the color palette right over his eye. I think that's this kind of fun, quirky, irreverent tone that you're going to block up one of his eyes because all he sees is color. I think that's really cool. She was able to find more business card examples with gradients. I like that. The photography within the interior of the building, we like that as well. There's this nice warm golden orange light flooding across from left to right. Some things that are still missing from this, which is illustrations. The illustrations don't feel cohesive. They feel like they're line work and not necessarily an integral part. We don't want the illustrations to feel like they're an afterthought or an overlay, so it's really important to dial that in. It's wonderful also to see the additional examples, the colored powder that she's added to this, more gradients, more typographic examples. You can see this is starting to come to life. So what happens is a lot of the images in the last round get knocked out for newer images, and it's an evolution. Okay, in Stylescapes 3 and 4, there's subtle differences, but some that are worth pointing out. The illustrations feel like they're fun, they're wacky, but the client feedback on this one was they don't feel like in keeping with what is in style right now. So it's the right attitude, it's the right sensibility, just not what they think is stylish. So they wanted us to go back and find a style that was more popular and contemporary, and they reference something with small heads, small arms and feet, but like long bodies, and that style that seems to be very much on trend. That's really the only key difference between the 3rd and the 4th Stylescape, and I think those are pretty easy tweaks to make. I do want to recap this before we end this segment of it, which is this, is that it's much easier, less painful and less costly for you to make these kind of adjustments in the Stylescape phase to really dial it in before going to design. Because when you're designing, you're spending hours making an illustration, you're spending hours doing layouts versus minutes trying out ideas really quickly. And that is one of the true beautiful things about Stylescapes.